I'm very happy to introduce the first speaker, Professor Tommaso Calarco from Research Center Jülich in Germany. So he's the director for the Institute of Quantum Control, and I think it's fair to say that he was one of the main people behind the formation of the Quantum Flagship. And the presentation he will give is about quantum technologies in Europe from a flagship to a fleet.
Thank you very much. It's very nice. So it is a very sparse session. So it appears that we are among us. So it's kind of a family session. And probably most of you already know this. So probably it is going to be very boring. So, but what can I do? I mean, Joran asked me to do this. And so this is what I will do. And so here is a transparency in which, I mean, the details are not important. What is important is that quantum computing here is among really the top level goals that the European Commission for the next digital decade, so for the next 10 years, set to itself. And so it really means that our field is becoming something which is very prominent in the mind and also in the actions of the European Union. And the reason why we started the flagship was that the European Commission wanted to start from the scientific excellence that we have throughout Europe, and very strongly also in this country, and very strongly also in this community, of course, because the solid state community is very prominent, very important, of course, in our field, next to other platforms. And the point was that we want to go towards, turning this scientific excellence into, commercialization, so really create a quantum industry and make sure that we can attract talent and also investments from outside of Europe even. So essentially, you might be familiar with the fact that this is happening, and so someone is calling me on the phone, but I really have no time to do that now, sorry. So you may be familiar with the fact that we have different application areas, so communication, computation, simulation, sensing, and metrology. But one very important point is that all of this rests on a basis of basic science. So this field started, as we see from the Nobel Prize, which was awarded to two of our most prominent colleagues, which did something completely useless 40 years ago. They investigated some philosophical phenomena. They were not interested in any applications. And this is what really gave rise to the field that as we know it today. So it's very important to always remember that, the basis of open-ended, long-term, curiosity-driven basic quantum science has always to be the foundation for all of this. And of course, it leads to different application areas, which are in the lab, of course, connected with different dimensions, including, a very prominent component of engineering and also aspects of software theory. But it fits into other infrastructures. So not just research, like the quantum flagship, but also different quantum infrastructures, which I will mention in the other parts of my talk. So here is a slide which I copied from a presentation I gave 5 years ago when I rented, and Joran was there and several of you were there, also Per was there, I think, when I rented the Vienna Imperial Palace for the kickoff of the flagship, which was rather expensive, I can tell you, but it was worthwhile because what we started actually, went through, and I am putting with copy and paste the, classical function Ctrl-C, Ctrl-V of a classical computer. I am putting this from that presentation for two reasons. First, because I am lazy and I like to recycle slides. It is very ecological to recycle electrons in your slides. But second is because, there is a very important risk, which I would like to state ahead of everything in case there are any decision makers among you today. One important risk is hype. So I am the director, as was mentioned, of the Institute of Quantum Control, but what I do for a lot of my time is quantum hype control, because it is very, very dangerous, and there are people increasingly in industry, interestingly. It's not like the scientists saying, oh, what we will do will change the world. No, it's people in industry which want to sell it to their CEO, and then they start exaggerating. And this is extremely dangerous because it can undermine the credibility of what we are doing. And so it is very important and dear to me that what we put on this slide 5 years ago when we started the flagship for the ramp-up phase, really corresponds essentially one-to-one with what has been achieved. Actually, not fully, it's maybe 95%. If we have achieved 100% of what we promised, then it would be a miserable failure, of course, because it would mean that we didn't have any real ambition. But if we achieved most of it, as this slide shows, this is a slide that we presented last year at the cluster review meeting of all the projects from the flagship, from the ramp-up phase, and you can see that in many of these fields, there are scientific firsts on world scale. For instance, practical quantum advantage, you might have heard, I will mention that also later, about the Google quantum supremacy experiment. Of course, they regret in the meantime having used that word. We call it quantum advantage in Europe, but this was on a purely academic kind of problem. And here, in Europe, for the first time, we got a quantum simulator achieving quantum advantage, meaning the possibility to solve in a faster time than a supercomputer, a problem of scientific interest. Is not yet of commercial interest, okay? But a problem, a two-dimensional Hamiltonian problem, which was solved on a quantum simulator in a way which a classical supercomputer cannot match. And this is something that we achieved in Europe. And even though we do not maybe pull out our trumpets so much to go to the press every time this is happening, maybe we should really do it more. But still, we are very much strong as a result of the first years of the flagship. Other aspects are, for instance, first quantum network with quantum repeater nodes, as well as the first examples of a hybrid HPC quantum infrastructure, which was among the goals of the European Digital Decade, as I mentioned before, as well as many others. And it is wonderful that we have a lot of this in every country where we go in Europe. Like we have in 2 days in Stockholm a demonstration of the results of the flagship. And of course, since we are in Sweden, it would be appropriate to showcase, for instance, a quantum computer made in Sweden. And indeed, we have one. And there is a 25 superconducting qubit device. I think half of them are operational, and it will be demonstrated on stage, in Stockholm at the Digital Assembly, which is the big year event. And Per Delsing here is the boss of that effort in Chalmers, and of course, Joran Vendin is also involved, and several other of the people here. So, and this is not something which is happening just in Sweden, but in very many countries of the European Union, we have academic efforts and startups which really make those results a reality. So, well, this is in several fields, for instance, quantum communication. And here, again, we start having some reflection about what is the international competition doing. Because we know that the Chinese government funded a quantum communication, it's not really a network, it is a series of connected segments, point-to-point segments between Beijing and Shanghai. They also did a satellite experiment, so a secure quantum communication via satellite. And this is something which, of course, we also want to create at European level. So we are creating a European quantum communication infrastructure. I will mention that in a moment, what it is and how it works. In which we are going to connect, and also Sweden has its own network in this context, and in the next step we are going to connect across borders in order to create between the different national networks a European-wide backbone for, say, future quantum internet and secure applications. Then another, and then here the agenda for this is something, so you can take a picture of this and you will be directed to the strategic research agenda of the European Quantum Flagship, in which we set out the different goals, which have been achieved, most of them for the first part, and now we are updating that. You will have a QR code also for the new version that we are preparing for the next several months. Within the next this year, we are going to finalize that, and everybody from the community is welcome to give an input there. And here in quantum communication, this is the field which is most mature, of course, and we have the goal of improving really sort of the practical usability in terms of scaling up the range of these devices and reliability and robustness, and also lowering costs for a series of applications that we see here, and many more details are to be found in our research agenda, which you find here. And really, this is something which is coming from the community. So, us, it comes from us, from really our colleagues, such as yourselves. This is, brought together, and this is then the basis for the calls which the European Commission is issuing. Then computing is, of course, the other field in which, of course, you start, worrying because, the Americans, this is a IBM system Q1. which they commercialized. Then, of course, Google comes, as I mentioned before, with this quantum supremacy experiment. But then, as a result of our flagship, we start having European startups. So this is a picture from a startup, which is co-founded, not everybody knows that, but our colleague Alain Aspect, who got a Nobel Prize this year, again, not far from here, again, of course, because Sweden is very important also for that. He is a young entrepreneur, so he is a co-founder and co-owner of this company, Pascal, which is the one which has achieved this quantum advantage, and of which one first simulator is going to be installed in two supercomputing centers in Paris and in Jülich, in order to really start working as a coprocessor. And also here, here this is still not yet so commercially advanced, of course, as quantum communication, so there are still different platforms. These are actually the quantum computing platforms which were mentioned in the previous version of the strategic research agenda. Now some of them, like topological qubits, are no longer, let's say, so considered so feasible, also following some recent retractions of papers from prominent journals. But other platforms are still being pursued. And here the point is really both to develop software and hardware on the quantum level, but also connecting those computers in terms of secure communication for developing quantum networks. And of course, this is also connected to the aspect of simulation, in which you have already some use cases which are being developed and studied by several companies, from chemistry to material sciences, but also in terms of optimization, routing, and increasingly these services are going to be offered as cloud services, both co-located with the supercomputing centers, but also, really as a cloud service with access that we will demonstrate in 2 days from now in Stockholm to the sort of local machines which are being developed. So, of course, there is another field which is even more diverse, the one on sensing and metrology, in which you use individual quantum systems to measure different quantities, which could be, time, like with quantum clocks, could be temperature, pressure. One important field here is high-resolution microscopy and sensing of magnetic fields, which can, for instance, be applied in biology, for instance, for detection of brain activity, and also for diagnosis of illnesses. The long-term vision is, if you wish, really long-term, like 10, 15 years, is, you walk through a scanner like in an airport, and the scanner goes beep, not if you are carrying a gun, but if you would better require a careful screening for instance, some cancer cells. And this is something which is nowadays impossible, and there is a path towards that, and so it is not unrealistic, it is something that could happen, provided that there is sufficient investment, and that we have a little bit of luck, like we had with these other applications that we discussed here. So there are other aspects here, as I mentioned before, not just the application areas, but also what we now call scientific and technological resources, in the sense really of the foundational questions, understanding the coherence, understanding quantum information from the theoretical point of view, as well as technological resources in terms of, really all the enabling, like cryo, electronics, nanofabrication, manufacturing, but also the control aspects, and then the development of software for the different layers of the stack. So all of this is, of course, very relevant to bring together the whole machinery. So here is a picture of, well, what we had as a vision 5 years ago. So it starts from the flagship, driven by the strategic research agenda, with different sort of dreams or moon landings, and some of them, as you can see, are already being achieved, and some not yet, of course, like intelligent drug design is still yet to come. And also navigation for autonomous driving, but some of these are coming up, and of course this is connecting also with other sectors of the activities of the European Commission, because this is in the framework program for research and innovation Horizon Europe, but there is also the space program, which is relevant both for the infrastructure on communication as well as for future applications on navigation, but also with the Digital Europe program, in which all the cybersecurity aspect is located, including the high-performance computing, but also all the aspects of education and skills in terms of also support for early career investigators. And not only the Commission is relevant here, but also member states, in the sense of, for instance, of this consortium Quanterg, which is 39 funding agencies from all the member states of the European Union and several associated states. There are other organizations such as specialized like Euramet, which is the Association of Metrology Institutes at European level, and also the European Space Agency. But then, of course, on the horizon, there is also cooperation with other partners outside of Europe. For instance, we just starting, actually tomorrow will be the first meeting of the working group from the Trade and Technology Council between the US and the European Commission for discussing specifically a quantum task force, which will discuss cooperation, reciprocity, and other aspects of quantum technologies together across Europe and the United States. So you see here, it starts from research, and here is the flagship more on the research side, but of course ERC and Marie Curie actions even more upstream, and then it goes down towards infrastructure projects in the Digital Europe program, and also a quantum fund, because one very important problem that we have here in Europe is that there is not sufficient cash for investment, and there is not sufficient number of investors and venture capitalists ready to invest here as compared, for instance, to the US. And so this is something which also the European Commission, with the European Investment Bank, European Investment Fund, and the European Innovation Council is starting to be engaged. So here is an overall view on how this would work. So there is the research aspect, and the ramp-up phase of the flagship has already been concluded, and we are in the middle of the technology demonstration phase, and then we will go more towards implementation, and this is accompanied by these different infrastructures, which I will mention in a moment, and also with the necessary production capability in terms of pilot lines, testing facilities, in order to make these devices a potential industrial reality. And also we are starting this quantum fund, and all of this should converge, at the end of the decade in terms of a quantum ecosystem. So the aspect of infrastructures, I already mentioned a couple of times. This is the point. You want to go from the lab, so the flagship will mature the technology up to the door of the lab, and then once it is there, you have to take it into the market. So you have to make it more reproducible, lower costs, more reliable, and also you have to take care that the intellectual property is, exploited here, where not only the ideas are created, but also the value gets created here. And so one example of such an infrastructure is the quantum computing and simulation infrastructure, in which now we have 7 sisters. So the first pilot project was with this quantum simulator from Pascal, which is coming. Well, actually, I got to the first. I never know how to say that in English. In German, it is Mengenrabatt. So I convinced the company to sell us 2 quantum computers for the price of 1. Yeah, literally, yeah, no joke, okay? And so it goes both to Paris and to Jülich, and there are 6 more hosting sites which will start, and this is going to be installed probably around the end of this year, but there are 6 more hosting sites, including LumiQ, here between Finland and Sweden, which is sort of one of the Nordic clusters in which this sort of connection with, and actually this will be part also of the demonstration that we are going to do in a couple of days. And the idea is that you take these quantum processors and you put them together with the classical high-performance computing hardware in order to test different platforms, to see how it can work, this integration, and also to develop new applications in order to give access to the users and also to grow a user community. So this is something which, of course, requires also the ability to produce these devices. We will come back to that in a moment. But the other infrastructure is the European Quantum Communication Infrastructure, which is the idea of combining satellite and terrestrial links in order to use the already commercially available quantum key distribution devices in order to already start a series of first applications in terms of protection of data, synchronizing clocks, and so on, and in the future being a backbone for the future quantum internet. Internet consists of computers connected by communication channels. Now we are developing the quantum communication side of this. We are also developing the quantum computers, and in a longer-term future, we'll combine them, and this is the broader dream of the quantum web. We don't know whether it will ever come to happen, but as a matter of fact, we have been surprised by how many things that we hoped could happen did actually happen, so we are optimistic. And here is, of course, the reason for this slide is to show you that I can still wear my wedding dress, because as you can guess, since I'm a physicist, it is the only proper dress that I own at all, so it is very lucky that I could still wear it, because I had to wear it when I presented for the first time a mini EuroQCI, so European Quantum Communication Infrastructure, between 3 member states of the European Union, Slovenia, Croatia, and Italy, at the G20 2 years ago, in front of all the ministers for research and innovation of the European Union. And also in that case, it was an Italian presidency, G20 presidency event, so we needed, as much as in Stockholm in 2 days we needed some Swedish quantum computer, there we needed some Italian quantum communication device, and yes, there is a quantum communication startup in Italy which demonstrated that, and actually they are the same which are also going to be part of this demonstration that we do in Stockholm. So this is again to testify to the fact that indeed this is growing in all member states across the European Union, and so we have a basis for a broad infrastructure there. But of course, as I mentioned before my chairman starts getting agitated, I have to mention that if you want to make these things not just in a lab but make them commercially available, you have to make it a reality in terms of industrial production capability. And so there, we entered the discussion on the CHIPS Act. The CHIPS Act is a law by the European Union, which will answer the question what will happen when China will take Taiwan, because we know that during COVID there was this little issue that we could no longer buy cars made in Europe because all the chips were made there. And so the idea is, okay, let's start make our own chips. So that, semiconductor standard chips, so that we acquire technological independency. But of course, the same is valid for quantum. And so the point is that we convinced the European Parliament. So I went to the European Parliament with a quantum computer in my hand, okay? Commission Vice President Vestager was there, and she took a picture of me with her mobile phone and posted it on Twitter so that you can verify that this is a true statement. And then with this quantum computer in my hand, I put it on the desk of the rapporteur for the CHIPS Act. And I started my pitch in terms of, I have 2 minutes, thank you, started my pitch in terms of trying to convince him that he should give me a couple of billions and put quantum chips in the CHIPS Act. And I started giving my pitch, and he said, stop, I don't want to hear it, just tell me what I have to write in the law. So I did that, and with the classical function of a classical computer, Ctrl-C, Ctrl-V, he put it in the law, so now it is there. And the Swedish presidency, thank you Swedish presidency, also validated that, and now it was signed, the agreement, and it will be voted finally into law in a couple of months in Brussels. And the idea here is that we develop design libraries, pilot lines for producing these devices, and also testing and experimentation facilities for giving access to startups which can really, without affording the whole infrastructure, but bring their ideas to really industrial production. So this is what I was mentioning before. So all of these aspects which I mentioned now, not just the scientific aspect, are coming into the strategic research and industry agenda, which you can download over there. All of you will be asked to give contributions to this and input. So this is something that we expect to sort of consolidate by the summer, because it has to be ready and given to the Commission by the end of the year. And, well, then there is, of course, the industry dimension, which is strategic research and industry agenda. And I know that there are other speakers also here today from the Quantum Industry Consortium, so I guess that I will not go in detail into what the QUIC is doing, and I will just finish with my summary slide, which is telling you, all the aspects of this ecosystem which has grown in the last few years, which involves all member states, involves all communities, but also increasingly also industry, in order to deploy the advantages coming from quantum technologies for the benefits of European society. Thank you very much.
Other questions?
Yes, so I'm interested in the Quantum Chips Act, or the quantum part of the Chips Act. Maybe you can elaborate on that. What is the plan, or what's the timeline for making the plan?
So the timeline for making the plan is, so it is going to be finally voted into law. The compromise is already achieved, so it's fixed. Quantum chips are part of it, and this summer it will be voted in the European Parliament. Then there is going to be a joint undertaking, so a public-private partnership, which is going to be an evolution of the current joint undertaking KDT, Key Digital Technologies. It will be turned into the sort of chips joint undertaking. And of course, also the quantum part will be present there. And this will be driven, the agenda will be driven by industry, but it will also have a research part. And as far as quantum chips are concerned, these are the lines which I put in the article, which they sort of copied and pasted. And so these are the activity lines that we are going to fund. And I mean, if there was no war in Ukraine, this would be now worth a couple of billions. And now it is definitely less than that. So I hope that, well, I mean, it will certainly be at least $500 million for this, and you know, I'm optimistic that it could be a little bit more than that, and we are in discussions with the Commission to over the time scale of the next, let's say, 4 or 5 years to start with. So it's not so bad. Yeah.
Then let's thank Tommaso Calarco again.